Hello there, and welcome to SaberDuel Gaming, where we always take the high ground. But on this occasion, we potentially take the lowest ground of all, as we venture down to the shores of hell with the original Doom. With such a complex past, we've decided not to just do a retro review of one version of the game, but to look at the entire history of this one game, as well as reviewing different versions of it across multiple different consoles, and even on the PC. So with that in mind, welcome again to SaberDuel Gaming, and welcome to Doom, a retro review and know your history special. Whilst Doom is maybe not the actual father of first-person shooting games, it is probably the most iconic and famous, to a point where other first-person shooters were commonly referred to as Doom clones. Ironically enough, the true father of this first-person shooter franchise would be Wolfenstein 3D, and Doom's development tied in directly to that. The development of Doom itself started in 1992, when John Carmack developed the game engine known as the Doom engine, whilst the rest of ID Software finished the Wolfenstein 3D prequel, Spear of Destiny. His reported inspiration for this game was Dungeons & Dragons, the Evil Dead films, and Aliens. Not a bad selection of topics to base your game on. Early in development, some rifts did develop between members of the team, with Tom Hall, one of the lead designers, developing a document which he called the Doom Bible that described a detailed plot, backstory and developing story for the game. John Carmack, however, wanted to focus entirely on the gameplay and the ability of the engine itself. He wanted one big seamless adventure without any levels. However, this was something they would have to compromise on, as even with the Doom engine, that just was not possible. And unfortunately for Tom Hall, the rest of the team agreed with Carmack and decided to focus entirely on the action of the game rather than the story and realism that he wanted. Instead, the story he developed was restricted to other documents, including the instruction manual telling people what the game's content was based around. Finally, in 1993, Doom was released on PCs for free as SharePlay, with later episodes being available for purchase. Its reception on the PC was staggering. It's considered one of the most significant games in video game history, and by 1999 it had sold an estimated 3.5 million copies, and between 10 and 20 million were estimated to have played it within 2 years of its launch. Despite its success on the PC, the port over onto games consoles was a little bit more varied. Depending on the console would depend on just how much content could be included, just how smoothly the game played, and how well the graphics looked. Ports, for example, onto the PlayStation generally played out quite well despite some dodgy loading times. However, versions that were brought over to, for example, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System were a lot more questionable. They had a lot less content, and the gameplay itself was a lot more laggy. However, generally Nintendo fans were so glad to be able to play this type of game that they probably didn't mind too much. So that's a quick summary of the development of Doom, and trust me, there's a lot more behind it as well. But what about the actual game review, both back when it was released and now? Well, it's quite hard to talk about this because obviously it was released on so many different consoles at so many different points. But let's give it a go. Well, my first experience of playing this game was indeed on a home computer, however, not mine. This was round at a friend's house and he had a pretty good setup for the early 90s. And playing Doom there was a mixed experience. First of all, I'd never seen graphics or a sort of three-dimensional game of this level. It felt for the time, I think I referenced earlier, like genuine virtual reality. This first-person approach was staggeringly good. And it was rare to see games this bloody and violent. Most games at this point were very much childlike fun. However, there was one massive issue with it, which was the use of a keyboard. I'd never used a keyboard for controls, and it was the most obnoxiously difficult thing. But I acknowledge that's because I am a console gamer, always have been, always will be. A year or so later, I picked up a copy of that earlier mentioned version of the game on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and I had to acknowledge how difficult and laggy the game was. The amount of content that was missing, I probably didn't realise until more recently. However, I still enjoyed the game. And whilst reviews that you will see online of it now rated as something like between 50 or 60%, I still genuinely enjoyed it. And everyone else I knew seemed to as well, except people that had played it on the PCs. They'd seen just how subpar it was by comparison. But that's probably a very unfair measure. On the whole, the gameplay was enjoyable, fun, it was brutal and gory and violent, and unapologetically so, almost to the point of parody. Weapons such as the BFG, and if you don't know what that stands for, look in the comment section, or just ask me in the comment section. I'll tell you there. Zombie soldiers, giant floating skulls, floating ball demons. I mean, what the hell could you expect from a game like this? It's fantastic and hilarious, gory and silly. It was wonderful. But how does it stand up now? And I don't mean newer versions of the game, I mean this original game. Well, it's interesting. In reviewing this game, and as a way of getting the footage that you're seeing right now, I bought it on the Nintendo Switch, expecting this to be the version that was released on the SNES. However, this is actually much closer to the original PC version of the game, with all the additional content. And don't get me wrong, after having played so many modern combat games and modern shooters, the controls of this feel ridiculously basic. Not being able to aim up or down, or move around and point my weapon in different ways. But within a few minutes of sinking back into that type of gameplay, I absolutely loved playing this game. It hadn't lost any of its charm at all. If anything, I actually developed a lot more nostalgia for it replaying it. And maybe there was a little bit of that because I'd never really spent a great deal of time playing the PC version of the game, but it still stands up very well. Obviously there are aspects of the game that feel dated, but in some games these add charm rather than taking away from the fun of the game. Maybe that's because I'm old enough to remember playing the game in the first place. It's very possible that people that have never played it before would just find it old and lame, but I'm not so sure they would. It still feels very fun, and ironically enough, walking around the levels, I was very aware of how Minecraft a lot of it looked, so maybe that'd give it a specific charm for even younger people. The legacy of Doom has been incredible. Numerous more games were made, both direct sequels to the original Doom, and as new consoles have been released, Doom 64, and even more recently Doom Eternal, etc, etc. More Doom games being constantly released. However, one thing that's also noticeable is how many times the original Doom or the original Doom games have been re-released, because they continue to be a good seller. Many aspects of Doom have become genuine pop culture icons, and like a number of other games, it's also had its own spin-off film, and while you can debate whether that's something you enjoy or not, it still goes to show that Doom has spread beyond just the world of gaming, and has continued to stand the test of time. So, what score do we give Doom? Well, I have to be very, very clear. I am going to be rating the version of Doom that was released on the PC, and I think that same version is one that was released on a number of other consoles. It's certainly the version I played on the Nintendo Switch, so that's the version I'm going to be reviewing. Whatever I give this, I'm gonna have to say you're gonna need to take a few points off for the SNES version. So, here we go. For me, the game still holds a lot of charm and a lot of enjoyment. It's got an attitude that many games lack nowadays. I'd be lying if I said it had aged perfectly, but in many ways, its flaws are its charm, and this game still warrants a really good 8 out of 10. And without doubt, I would absolutely recommend that any fan of first-person shooters and or retro games check this out. Thanks for watching this video, and if you want to help SaberDuel Gaming continue to grow, try shotgun blasting that subscribe, like, and drop a comment down below as well. And feel free to subscribe here on YouTube, as well as Instagram and TikTok.